we have Tula Leibeck, who is Project Director for Development and Digitization, Project State Aid Activities at the Ministry of Finance in Finland. Thank you so much for being here, Tula. Then we have Michael Wernick, who is here at the moment for as the Senior Strategic Advisor Associate for MNP Digital, but many of you obviously will know Michael in the room because he was the former Clerk of the Privy Council of Canada, which is the UK's equivalent of the Cabinet Secretary. It's wonderful to have you here, Michael. I'm just going to move my microphone. I think that's better. Then we have Christina Lang, who is Chief Executive Officer at the Digital Service in Germany. I think you might want to move chairs just because you might get the microphones in the wrong order then. And then last but no means least, hi Megan, we've got Megan Lee, who is Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer at the Government Central Digital and Data Office in the UK. Now, this panel is all about, as you will see on there, the role of digital and data in policy making. So we'll be considering things like how best to integrate kind of the experts and the professions from digital and data so that that work gets really integrated into the policy making progress. We've asked our panelists to give some short opening remarks. And as I say, once we've heard from each of our panel members, we'll then come over to you in the audience for a conversation. So, Tula, over to you.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to say how it's a great pleasure to be here in Canada, the birthplace of ice hockey. As you know, all Finns love ice hockey, as well as I. And
I think Michael's just taking his off.
Okay.
I think it might be on.
I'm a great fan of Finnish team. Actually, myself, I'm a weightlifter. Actually, the Finnish champion from this year.
Wow.
In my age and weight group.
Fantastic.
But ice hockey is lovely too. Yes, and I graduated as a lawyer from University of Lapland, and I'm a little off because I'm so enthusiastic to digitalization. And but do I start with my points?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Can I get these slides?
Oh.
Do I have to press myself?
Thanks. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay.
The green one goes forward, the red one goes back.
First of all, I'd like to say that we don't have any lack of data. We have mass of data, but the main question is how to manage it and how to organize it so that we can get information and knowledge to decision makers. And that is the big problem. But I have 2 points I have like to point. The first is as I said, you have to harmonize data. We also heard that there are 7,000 papers and that kind of thing. In my project, we noticed that quite early that offices, they speak about things with different words. The language was different, and vice versa. You talked about something and then you meant different. So we have made a great, maybe 4 years glossary work. We are making glossary. We are having in this government grants process. That's the first point. And of course, the data must be interoperable. And the second point is that we have to know what we want to do, what we want to get out from the data. And it was maybe 5 years ago when I heard that we need thousands of data scientists. Yes, we'll do. But I think that we also have to have skills for offices like understand the measurements and reporting tools. We have to have a understanding of evaluating effectiveness. So it would be like more wise thinking of data. So that is the second point. And the third is transparency. That's my favorite. In Finland, we are opening public data so much, but we have to be aware of cyber security, information security, and data protection. That they are very important because it's the rule of law that people can trust that their data is and the information is well shared. And finally, you have to manage data. In Finland, I'm very proud of our government because we have a ministerial working group which is like managing and leading all the digitalization in Finland. And a few years ago, we got information, what it is, policy guidelines to the parliament. So it's the highest level. You have to like be aware about what is going on to the digitalization. And I heard last week that first thing this ministerial working group made, they explored about cyber security things all over the government and authorities. And that's very, very important point also. For me, I report to my minister regularly, and we have laws in parliament how to make things happen, like to open the data, and that's all. So the managing of data is important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tula. I think you set the bar there in terms of your personal story about being the weightlifting champion. So I'm expecting the same kind of insight from all of our speakers throughout the rest of the day. But thank you so much. I mean, you've set the scene there with really, I think, issues that will resonate with everybody here. So just the sheer volume of data that's being generated now, how do policymakers understand where the patterns are in all that noise, I think. The terminology can be confusing, I think, so having a set language that everybody understands. What's the policy objective if you're using the data, transparency, availability, but at the same time getting the balance right with privacy and security, and then that need for senior and political buy-in as well for all of this. So thank you so much. Michael, coming over to you.
Does this work? Okay, I got the technology problem. I'm not going to try to compete for personal achievements like that. Thank you to Global Government Forum. I've done a lot of partnerships and work with them over the last years, and I commend the organization to you and their resources and their courses and so on. I've done some deep dives with MMP Digital and a couple of organizations and continue to learn over the last couple of years. But I guess what I can offer at this panel is a perspective of having worked in and around ministers, cabinet, and the community of deputy ministers for the last 20 years or so. And so just a few sort of observations from them. Think of it as user experience, basically, and their part in digital government and the road along. I mean, if you want more, I'll put in a plug for my book on governing Canada about ministers and prime ministers and how they think and work. But a couple of points quickly. Apart from their life experience and what part of the country they come from, how they learn, how they process information, and how they take decisions is enormously varied. Some of them are very visual, some of them need to talk, some of them need to argue and stress test arguments, and some of them read a lot. Their levels of tech savvy, numeracy, statistical background vary a lot. So I would say that if you want to do big things in digital government in a democracy, you have to understand politicians. And I would read up not on the technology, but about humans. It's really important to learn about human psychology and organizational behavior. Those are disciplines, and you can learn up on them. How humans interpret information and learn is fundamental. Be mindful of concepts like confirmation bias and sunk cost fallacy, baseline fallacy, sharpshooter bias in data, and so on. Read the Kahneman books on think fast and slow and noise and so on. The way to better digital government is to better understand humans, certainly the ones that get to make the decisions in a democracy. Politicians are very alert to the outliers and distribution. Averages are almost useless to elected politicians. Trouble for them in the media and the opposition comes from the outliers and the rare cases, and you have to have information systems that are going to detect and correct those. I would say that the way ministers think about digital government, which has been an ongoing journey, certainly goes back to government online and the internet and other waves of technological change, is that the way they think about these issues varies enormously. It's not uniform. Transactional services, which is the language we tend to go to quickly, are the easy part. Politicians want transactional services to work. The feedback of voters is instant for them, and you're pushing on an open door when you're trying to convince them to do something about externally facing transactional services. It is a factor of 10 harder to get them interested in internal services, what I like to call G2G, government services, that are behind and make all of those external services possible. They are still treated, both by ministers and within government, as overhead, as Kevin referred to. They are not thought of consistently as investment or recapitalization. They are extremely vulnerable every time there is a spending review or a dialing back of resources. And a factor of 10, even harder than that, is to get anybody to care about the management of text-based records. Please do what you can to support Catherine in her agenda. Records management is a shambles in Canada. I'm sure it is in other places. And investment in legacy records is the least likely place that ministers are going to go to for investment and decisions. The most important decisions governments take are allocative. Where are they going to put money? Where are they going to put people? Where are they going to put effort? Those are not well connected to digital government yet. And so I would go through the thought experiment. In Canada, at least, we had major austerity waves and downsizing budgets around 1995, around 2012. Winter is coming. There will be another. Will the next program review and spending review be smarter because digital government tools have made it possible to do the simulations? What would I do with 10% fewer resources? What would I do with 10% fewer people? It is inevitable that governments in Canada are going to want to reduce the footprint in the workforce. And the ability to contribute to conversations about how am I going to do this with 10% or 12% or 15% fewer humans. So we're going to go back to concepts around productivity and workflows and value added of the humans in our organization. Do we have the digital tools that are going to be able to do the work with fewer people? And that's inevitably coming to Canada, as it will, I think, to other countries. I often get asked where policy comes from. And the sort of flow of it, in my experience, is that there's sort of two kinds of information go to decision makers, the women and men that we choose to make these kind of decisions. The biggest one is actually a feedback loop on past policy changes, past programs. Are they working? How are they doing? Where are they broken down? Where are they falling short? Where are they succeeding? And the other is input around new things, truly new things that could be done to respond to issues out there. So digital government has to be fully effective, has to connect to the feedback community, which is in Canada larger than the input community. There are a dozen institutions built for feedback, which is a good thing. Offices of Parliament, agents of Parliament, staff of parliamentary committees, a community of evaluators, a community of auditors, professional development communities around those people that do feedback. They are not well connected to digital government, and all of those efforts that were on Kevin's bubbles have to be applied to the feedback communities within government as well. I would say that it's important to understand the way that ministers think about these issues, in the sense that, yes, tech vendors and consultants and researchers always think more data is better, more interconnection is better, joined up is better. But politicians will be very influenced in a democracy by countervailing issues around privacy, around breaches, they will be scared. Data breach can be a career-ending move for a minister or a deputy minister. And the chill around project failures when they break down is enormous. And they don't want to have it on their watch. I don't want to be the person who is responsible for the next fill in the blank. So the easier thing to do is to slow down and push things off. Under any pressure from the opposition or the media or the feedback community, the instinct of a government of the day, whoever they are, is to retreat. So it takes a lot of effort to keep the momentum going forward. And frankly, the risks around privacy and cybersecurity and foreign interference are legitimate things for our governments to worry about. So they have to be brought into the design. The key is going to be trust, and these are obvious things, but the hard work around security, internal controls, the credibility of what you say around firewalls, anonymization of data, need to know access protocols, and so on. These are real risks, and in a democratic society under the rule of law, it's hard work. It's much easier in an authoritarian country to get all these things right. And I know this is coming up later today, be very rigorous in thinking about the bias in the data and the data that's not there. Who's not being captured by your data sets? Who's being left out and pushed to the margins? Beware of what I call policy-based evidence. And we'll go back to confirmation bias. People see what they want to see. And you have to be very rigorous in correcting for that. I guess the last point I'd make, because it'll come up in a lot of the examples today, is you could have an entire conference in Canada about the federalism of digital government. In a week where we've seen an election in Quebec and we're about to see a new premier in Alberta, we don't really need a reminder. But everything significant in Canada involves 2 and sometimes 3 levels of government. Think about climate change, emergency response, housing, healthcare, safe communities, Indigenous reconciliation, the COVID response. I can go on and on. So a variety of governments doing a variety of services makes all of those 3 circles on Kevin's chart, a factor more difficult. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but you have to work really hard on issues around standards, norms, interoperability. Verification of identity across levels of government is much harder than verification across one level of government. So you have to do the hard work, to make digital government work in a federation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael. I mean, so much in there for us to unpack, so please start thinking about your questions. But really like what you said about just thinking about how ministers and other senior officials as well, how they learn. This is more about people necessarily than it is about the technology. I think really interesting point. Maybe I need to speak a bit slower. Being aware of ministers' concerns. I think maybe some of the professions don't necessarily think about what politicians are thinking about. Very interesting what you said, they're scared of the data breaches, they're scared of project failures. It's a very genuine concern, very understandable concern for them. But then also what you said about the need, as resources get tighter, which they're going to around the world, to be able to make the case for investment in these areas. So much to unpack there. Thank you so much. Christina, over to you.
Thank you. I'd actually can follow up with what Michael said with a very concrete example of the work we're currently doing in Germany. As we're not exactly a digital front runner as a country, I'm super happy to build on the knowledge that you've been developing with the government forum, and happy to be here. So basically, currently we're working with the Ministry of the Interior in the German federal government to develop a digital readiness check. And that's based on the recognition that in order to develop better digital services, we need digital ready legislation, and we need digital expertise, data expertise, competencies early on in the policy-making process. And Michael touched upon the challenges of federalism. Usually the separation between the policy design, the process design, then the service design, and at the end, the service implementation hinders and is a big challenge for feedback loops and actually reaching data information back into the policymaking process. Currently, we're focusing on the phase between the setting of a political ambition or a political proposal and then the first formal draft. And we're working with an interdisciplinary team with the actually process designers in the Ministry of the Interior in order to think about how can a digital readiness check be more than just a checklist. And we've been working on it for a few months, and I just wanted to share like the top 3 learnings that we've had to facilitate the discussion. The first one is, if you want digital ready legislation, there's no one-size-fits-all checklist. Not every lawmaking process is the same. We have different audience levels within the government that we need to think about when we talk about digital readiness. So we're currently looking at first developing principles or like cornerstones of what makes legislation digital ready. Based on that, we want to develop methods and approaches that are targeted towards public sector decision makers, and then based on this, guiding questions that public servants, legists themselves can use in their daily work. The second learning is working in interdisciplinary teams provides better results also when you think about redesigning core government processes. The fact that we have been working with a task force that is set up across government, so from different agencies and ministries, has been enormously helpful in gathering feedback and evidence based on what's currently working well and what isn't in legislation, in the policy making and the legislative processes. And that helps us to actually change these core processes and provide evidence and facts for decision makers to change something about these ways of working. And the second one is that iterating in this process is crucial to success. So we're currently working on the first draft of this digital readiness check that will be aligned by the end of the year, but then we're putting it in use. So we will check the first policies, regulation, bills that are being designed or are being created in the next year, and we will iterate on the checklist, on the principles in the next year in order to make it better, to make it become more known throughout government, and to basically just optimize this regulation and this framework that policymakers and lawmakers can work with. And the third one is a bit of a long shot, but in an ideal world, policy design would be in parallel or at least more integrated with process and service design. And that is something we are currently looking at also in regards to the different federal levels. How can we bring prototyping, bring technical feasibility tests also already in the policy design process so that it doesn't hinder implementation afterwards?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, really interesting to hear the shared challenges around federalism. I think that's one thing, and that will be different, obviously, for every country, depending on how you're governed, how you're structured. Really interesting to hear about your digital readiness check, because you're obviously taking the whole policy-making process and then seeing how you can really integrate that kind of data and digital checklist into the process. So again, please have your questions ready on any of this. As we go into our last opening thoughts, so over to you, Megan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. It's always ironic, isn't it? It's always when we come together as technologists that the tech doesn't work, and I think it doesn't help our brand too much. So I'm Megan Lee. I'm the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer in the Central Digital and Data Office. And before I share my thoughts on this topic in particular, I thought I might introduce to you what the Central Digital and Data Office is, in case it's not something you're familiar with. Many of you will know that GDS, and you've heard from Kevin this morning, was created many years ago to disrupt government in terms of digital. What we found over time, though, was that GDS in many ways were marking their own homework. And the creation of CDDO was a way to ensure that there was a sort of body that sat right at the center of government in the Cabinet Office that could look across, yes, the hundreds of colleagues in GDS, but also the 23,500 colleagues in the rest of government, in our departments, in our ALBs, and really wrap our hands around both of those communities and drive and lead the function through change. So we are the sort of the heads of the digital function for government, digital data and technology. We sit in the Cabinet Office, and we're a small team, but we're focused on driving consistency across government, building capability, and also really critically making sure that we put the conditions in place for government, for digital transformation of government from an institutional perspective as well. So in June this year, we released a strategy, and the creation of CDDO was an opportunity for us to sit back and say, and really look at the data and understand just how far the UK government had come in recent years. And what we discovered is that whilst we'd made really strong progress in a number of areas, and Kevin spoke to some of the exemplars earlier, it actually wasn't quite as positive a story as we might have liked to have seen. So looking at our services, for instance, you know, we have over 7,500 services at least. The data shows that only about 10% of them are great in terms of usability and efficiency. 10%. What that looks like in practice is that some services give momentarily, in moments, the benefits that people and businesses need from government. For instance, our furlough scheme, which was built during the pandemic, was a joint venture between Treasury and HMRC. And one of the most sort of ambitious economic interventions in the UK's history. And it was stood up in 4 weeks by a digital team. I'm sure you had many instances during the pandemic of doing similar brilliant feats through digital. But then at the same time, we have some really old services in government. We have some services that require people to print off forms, over 6,000 actually, on gov.uk, which means people need a printer. I mean, I don't know if you have a printer at home, but I don't. And so those that are really in need, that are coming to the government to access services, really struggle. And so we looked at, we sort of took a step back, and that sort of same narrative also applies around our technology and our state, and also our capability. And so what we said is we need to set out an ambition for 2025 that is quite achievable and realistic and considers our starting place and just how far we have to go. So what we're thinking about very much is around moving from pockets of progress, and this strategy that we launched in June is around moving away from just having pockets of brilliance across government to doing more enduring transformation. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of the organisation I work for and how we think about digital transformation of the UK government. Policy making. So 4 missions in our cross-government strategy are really targeting this in particular. And I'll speak about capability, about our sort of transformation of policy making, of which we've stolen, sorry, Christina, some of the amazing work that Germany's been doing. Data, and then institutional blockers to overcome. So in terms of capability, how we think about capabilities in terms of 3 core groups of colleagues across government. The first is our permanent secretaries. The second is our DDAP professionals, those 23,500, and then the third is everybody else, predominantly policymakers when we look at everybody else. And in terms of permanent secretaries, we've really changed our tack and used the creation of CDDO as an opportunity to speak directly to them about digital transformation of their departments. What does that look like? It looks like governance, it looks like sponsorship and ownership of our roadmap to 2025, and it looks like capability building. So when we launched the strategy, that strategy had been co-authored by the permanent secretaries of central government departments over a series of 6 months. An intense negotiation to make sure it was achievable, that they had the right financial backing behind their commitments. And they, in many ways, were, and we have a permanent secretary owner for each of the different missions. And that just enabled us to make sure we had the right buy-in and the right support from leaders. In terms of governance, we have a digital and data board, which is comprised of permanent secretaries, a new forum, well, not new, as new as us in CDDO, so we've been existing for about a year. And we come together and talk to them about digital and data. And it's an amazing lever through which we can ensure that we are holding feet to the fire in terms of achieving our transformation aims. And then on capability for our permanent secretaries, we've made a commitment that they all signed up to in that strategy we launched in June, that 90% will be upskilled, 90% of our SCS, our senior civil servants, in digital and data essentials by 2025. We've launched our Digital and Data Essentials on gov.uk, and it's a set of basic elements of digital and leadership of digital communities and services and the digitally enabled policy design to help our leaders understand what it takes to design policy that's fit for a digital age and design services that are usable and efficient. So that's that first community. The second community, our DDAP professionals, we're deepening their skill sets and doing a whole program of work around that, making sure we're doing strategic workforce planning, understand the skills needed in the future and working backwards from there. And that third community is particularly relevant to this topic we're speaking about this morning. Those same digital and data essentials are forming the basis of a core curriculum that we will embed in the capability frameworks of other professions across government. So we're working with the policy profession to help embed it in their capability frameworks so that all policy professionals have an expected minimum level of understanding around digital and data. And we're doing that with other professionals as well, so working with commercial, with finance, and beyond. So that capability piece is a really core point for us, which is there are 500,000 people that work for the UK civil service, and we don't think that enough of them have the sufficient levels of understanding of digital and data to inform policy making and service design. So we're working on addressing that.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much, Megan. I mean, again, really interesting to hear what CDDO do and why they were created, and interesting to hear what you said. Even though there are pockets of excellence and good stuff in the UK, there's still a lot more that can be done, having that enduring, lasting change. And also then really relevant for today is the upskilling needed for the non-professionals, whatever profession they're sitting in. How do you get that minimum level of understanding of what data and digitalisation
Can I quickly mention the other 2 points? I'll be very quick. So I also mentioned data, and I know you're hearing from my colleague Alison Pritchard on the Integrated Data Exchange later today, so I won't spend too much time on that. But in terms of data, we're looking at improving data quality, improving our data governance and standardizing that across government, and then making sure that critical data assets, those that underpin our top 75 government services, are available across government through operational data exchange, through our government data exchange, which is a piece of work that's in flight at the moment, or through the integrated data service, which is being built by the Office of National Statistics. So data is a really cool part. And then I mentioned institutional blockers, and this is where we have been learning from our friends in Germany, which is we know that government isn't designed to build policy fit for a digital age. And a lot of our processes and governance approaches get in the way. And so we have a program of work called System Reform, which is looking at how do we embed digital early on in the policy development process, and then how do we also make sure that our finance approaches, our approach to risk and so on, takes into consideration factors around digital in the broader economy, and also in terms of digital delivery of services, that delivery of policy that is deliverable as services.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much to all of you. If you have a question, can you put your hand up? We've got a couple of roving mics in the room. So I see there are 2 hands there at the back. As we get the mics to the people who want to ask questions, I've just got a quick question to all of you, which is, I mean, you mentioned there the furlough scheme in the UK, and other countries would definitely have done similar things, and I think used data in ways that had never been seen before in government, and connected policymakers with data professionals in ways that had never been seen and done before. Do you think this is a legacy from that, is that mindsets and culture has shifted, that policymakers are more conscious of what could be done with data, of the benefits of using data? And is that then a moment in time where data and digital professionals can use that as a bit of an open door going in? Tula, I'm going to come back to you, your thoughts on what shifted because of the pandemic.
Well, I think that now it's the right time to talk about that. And in European Union, we have this digital compass, which has been talked from last year. And in Finland, we have plans to make a Finnish digital compass, which will be the roadmap for the whole digitalization and digital transformation. And I think that politicians, at least in Finland, they really understand, how can I say that, they know that that is they have to understand digitalization, and it's more easier for civil servants after that.
Yeah, good. So there is a moment to capture.
Yeah.
Christina, is that the same you think that's shifted in Germany?
To be honest, I think like we've been doing fellowship programs for the past 3-4 years, and we see that when confronted with the paradigm shift that is necessary in order to work with digital talent, to work with data scientists, you need a learning space, and you need a concrete challenge that comes from the work that the policymakers or public servants would have to work on anyhow. But if you have those factors together in a short amount of time, you can really see people like internalizing what it would mean to work more digital, like to work with digital talent. I'm a bit careful in saying everybody can become a digital subject matter expert, because there's skills that you need to learn over years, and not everybody can do user research after they've watched someone do an interview. But to understand the advantages of interdisciplinary work, of thinking digital first, that is something that can, I don't really see like a paradigm, like that change throughout COVID. It's been something that we've been working on for years, and I think you always need like to basically reach people where they're at and help them in their daily job. You can't have them in like a separate education entity and then they come back to their job and they're like, but how does this help me tomorrow? And I think that's a really important factor.
Michael, did you see a shift in Canada?
Everybody's seen disruption or acceleration because of the pandemic experience, and that's gone through all kinds of aspects of the private sector and public sector delivery. I think my thesis on it is that it actually changed some of the calculus of change and resistance, and the most interesting changes that are underway in Canada are probably not the sort of easy transactional website services, but what happened in some of the most change-resistant sort of organizational systems, school boards, universities, courts, those kinds of things have guilds, they have unions, they have points of resistance and so on. And we saw people just thinking about problems in new ways, like, why do I have to print out a form? Why do I have to go in person and do this? I guess, the other point is some of this is just inevitable. These people are humans. It was kind of my first point. And, we learn from our own experience, renewing our driver's license, dealing with my mother's experience in the healthcare system, my kids' experience in the education system, how difficult or easy it was for me to set up my business and so on. So we learn anecdotally a little bit from all that. The turnover in the Canadian public service is about 8% a year. It's arguably rising, so half of it will turn over. So there's an inevitability to that. I think we have to get beyond just sort of, let's be digital. And it's a term which is so elastic to almost become meaningless now, and get into the real issues of change and resistance in specific areas.
And Megan, before we go to the question, in the UK, we saw for the first time kind of the Prime Minister every day giving data to the public in a way we'd never seen before. So that must have created some kind of change within the civil service.
Yeah, absolutely. If I think about the last couple of years, we had EU exit in the UK, and we had COVID, obviously, as did all of you. In the last few months, though, we've also had the lying in state of Her Majesty the Queen and a state funeral. We've had a budget, a fiscal event to respond to the energy crisis that you mentioned earlier. There is always another crisis, is how it feels like in government. And I think something we do well is respond in a crisis and mobilize resource and capability and focus, and we deliver. And I think that the COVID did teach us a number of things. I think there are three enduring benefits. One is the expectation of ministers and senior leaders that data be used on a daily basis to inform decisions, which is obviously hugely valuable and has enabled us to build on that. We've launched a data masterclass where our civil servants and our ministers, many of our ministers have now taken it to understand how to lead organizations better using data. The second change is the pace and the expectations around pace of standing up new services. Most of our services were stood up in weeks during the pandemic. It used to be months. And that has been a huge sort of a huge branding advantage for us in the digital function as to the art of the possible. And I think the third piece is around we are using data more. We're also building services more quickly. But what these crises have shown us is the need to work across departments much more effectively. Yeah. And I think there we had some brilliant examples during the pandemic of sharing data, for instance, between HMRC and the NHS, which enabled us to identify carers in the community and proactively reach out to them with vaccination, with offers for taking up the vaccinations. Those sorts of examples where we previously would have faced quite a lot of legislative blockers, cultural blockers, and we're able to cut through that in the pandemic. But I will caveat that sort of, those enduring changes and shifts that have come about by saying, has the pandemic addressed a lot of the fundamental challenges we face to achieving that enduring transformation I spoke about? And it hasn't. I think the reality is we still have 4,500 vacancies in the UK government in our digital function, and attracting and retaining great digital talent is still a real challenge for us, and we have a whole programme of work addressing that. Has it fixed a lot of our services at the moment? For instance, that child benefit service that I spoke about? Absolutely not. So I think there are certainly lessons we can take, but what we're very much focused on is actually not about those pockets of progress, not about those examples of where we've risen up in times of crisis and delivered, but how do we achieve that enduring transformation to the way that we do business as government, the way we deliver policy, the 500,000 people that work for us as an employer, and the 7,500 services we deliver to the public.
Thanks. Okay, so we had 2 questions. Do you want to just put your hand up so I can see? Thank you. The lady there.
Yeah.
I'll come to you in the blue shirt first, and then the lady in front second. We'll take 2 questions together.
Thank you. Dr. Leanne Hawkins, Looking Local, who are a UK local government-run provider of digital services. With the implementation of digital services comes the need to consider data protection. One of the culture shifts that I'm currently working on with the UK public sector is to push the implementation of data protection by design, which means ensuring that data protection is considered right at the start of implementing services, systems, products and processes. That brings huge burdens on information governance teams, and so they become a bottleneck to progress. One of the changes we're pushing forward is to empower the wider organisation to take more responsibility for their own data protection obligations. For example, working with the Metropolitan Police Force, they started with 190 processes which didn't have data protection impact assessments. Over the last 8 weeks, we've managed to get them down to 106 of those in the last 8 weeks by implementing some of those changes. So my question is, what do the panel think about data protection by design as a principle, and do you support the spreading of the responsibility of data protection across broader shoulders of the wider business?
Thank you so much. So data protection by design, and how should that be thought about? And then there was another question. We're going to take 2 because we're going to run out of time. So the lady in front as well.
Hello?
Yep. Oh, you're
okay.
Good.
Cynthia Compo from Statistics Canada. This is, I think, in line with what Michael was talking about, understanding people. And I was wondering if you had any insight on public opinion. And when sometimes the right digital move or the right move forward isn't popular because either it's not understood or for whatever reason. So do you have any insight on how we can move forward through that challenge?
Thanks so much. So, okay, I'm going to, on the panel, you can answer one or both of those questions. So the first one is, what do you think about data protection by design, and should it be spread, that responsibility, across the service delivery chain? And then the question there about, do we have any insights into the citizens and what they think about the use of data, and what do you do if it's not popular? So, let me think. We're going to shift up the order a bit. Christina, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Because data protection by design, or like ensuring data protection, data security, is actually one of the 5 principles that we have derived from the interviews and the need from lawmakers in order to ensure digital readiness. I'm a bit torn, though, because I feel like data protection by design is something you can agree upon without I'm sure everyone on this panel would agree on it, but how do you actually ensure implementation? What does it mean in practice? How can you help people? How can you maybe change the way institutions work together? At least in Germany, the data protection institution considers themselves to be rather like auditing, controlling, and not really advocating or consulting lawmakers or policymakers. And you need to enhance people, like you need to enable them to ensure that data protection is by design recognized and implemented in the beginning of a policy-making process, and not just one step towards the very end they have to jump across.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Michael?
Well, a couple of quick points. In terms of the real threats that come from hackers and denial of service and foreign interference and so on, I mean, the Government of Canada networks are attacked about 100 million times a day. So, and those are old numbers that I'm pulling out. I'm sure it's more by now. So, I mean, at least as I understand it, part of it is you simply have to have centralized standards and solutions to protect your networks and defend in depth. It's just not realistic that of the 300 organizations in the Government of Canada would go cap in hand to Treasury Board one at a time and get resources to deal with cybersecurity. You have to deal with it and create a safe perimeter and internal defenses for everybody, or the weakest link is where you're going to have a problem. So and that's just a reality of cybersecurity as I understand it. And it's really important to retaining that trust that politicians expect, that data will be held confidentially. I think some of the more interesting issues are about sharing across government inside the firewall. Is the premise sort of sharing unless, or is it sharing if you need to? And we're kind of conflicted on that in Canada. On the sort of, the question about politicians, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the right policy, the right initiative is what we elect politicians to do. And I think our democratic values are that, we elect people and they have the right to make decisions we consider to be the wrong course of action, as long as they're given strong advice on the consequences and the options. I think we have to respect the democratic processes on that. What I try to sort of rail about is there are filters and biases in the way that politicians think about issues and the reinforcement loops they get from media and social media and so on. And if we can sort of lean against those, we may be able to change the outcomes.
Thanks, Michael. Megan and then Tula, quick thoughts on these two questions, then I'm going to take two more before we go to our break.
Absolutely. So I think in CDDO, one of our core focuses is around data protection and making sure we build a culture of data protection. I think that has a number of different component parts. We are absolutely making sure we have the Data Standards Authority, which many of you will engage with in your roles, which develops the standards. We also have a component around awareness. We had a Data Connect conference over the last week where colleagues across government, thousands came together for hundreds of different sessions around the ethical and secure use of data and sharing of data across government. So there's a piece around making sure we have the formal mechanisms in place, the awareness, the capability as well, building data protection into the training that we give our DDAC colleagues, but also those the people in across government in other professions, including in policy. But absolutely, it's important. But for me, as Christina alluded to, it's not just about having those principles in place, but it's about how do you embed that in the culture of the civil service.
Oh, yes, briefly. For me, as a lawyer, it's easy to say that it's legislation, and in Finland we don't have common law, so I don't know how it works in Canada. But in public data you use, everything must be written in the law, and the Parliament has decided that, and it's quite heavy to write these paragraphs, but that's transparent, and everybody can trust that data, personal data, is in register now. About this, if you don't like the other question,
the citizen,
yeah, I believe in service design and co-creating and that kind of thing. It takes also times.
Yeah.
It needs work, but but I think that is the very good path.
I'm sure that will come up in other sessions we're having about kind of AI and digital IDs, for example, the importance of co-creation with citizens as well. So we've got time very quickly. I know we are now standing between you and coffee. Got time for, say, 2 more questions. So there's a person there. Thank you very much. And then does anybody else want to add another question? Nope. So we just do this final question. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Chantal, and I'm with IRCC on the data governance team. And it was only in response to the last question that I heard the word ethics. And as with our updating of our data policy, and we like to ensure that data is compliant, interoperable, timely, relevant, fit for purpose, and all those things. But what are you doing in your respective governments around ethics? Do you have ethical principles for ethics? How are you monitoring that? And how are you enforcing that? And how are you building and evolving that? Thank you.
Thank you. So a really broad question there, I think, about ethics. And I'm sure, although maybe we didn't mention it a lot today, that would definitely come up throughout the rest of the day as well. Michael, you're nodding. Let's go first on ethics.
Well, I won't speak to current Canadian experience, but I know that there are a lot of international conversations. I'll put in a plug for Global Government Forum as it organized conversations on this, and there is a group of digital countries. It was 6, then it was 9, then it was 12. Particularly the ethics around software, predictive technologies, AI, are very important, and there are all kinds of issues there about systemic racism and gender bias and exclusion and any number of ethics. So again, the thing about AI is not the technology, it's the humans, and it's very much the governance and the ethics, which is going to determine whether these are trusted tools of democratic governance or the tools of authoritarian government. Thanks,
Michael. Tula, what's happening on ethics in Finland?
Well, that is very important thing. And again, an example from Finland, we had a great discussion about can we make like tax decisions automatically? And well, actually, we couldn't. But now there will be a law about that, and it's like very narrow things you can do automatically. And AE is totally like the next step, but robotics and automatics, yeah, it is a discussion about that, and that also must be transparent.
Yeah, a big conversation going on. Megan, I know it's quite hard to do in 30 seconds.
I know, I'm just looking at the clock. So yes, to answer your question, it is a core principle of the way that we think about data in the UK government. And how we make sure that that happens is what I came back to before around formal mechanisms, but also awareness and training. I think in terms of our formal mechanisms, so the Data Standards Authority makes sure that data ethics is built into our frameworks, our standards, and our governance. I think an example of that, the best that we have in the UK government, is the Algorithmic Transparency Index that we launched earlier in the year, which again speaks to your point on transparency, making sure people understand how that machine learning or AI is built, and that we're exposing that to the public so that we can be subject to welcome scrutiny around the sorts of algorithms we're using.
Thanks. Christina, the final thoughts on ethics.
Actually, this is not core of our work. There is a data strategy, and the Ministry of Digital and Transport is working on, has an ethics board. The way we think about ethics is mainly through accessibility and inclusion, the way we build digital services. And we have an accessibility squad at the digital service that thinks about and learns about how to make services accessible and inclusive. But there are other actors in Germany that think a lot more about ethics in data.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for our panel, for sharing all your thoughts and expertise. You'll all be sticking around, I think, so if people want to grab you, challenge you on anything or agree with anything you've said, then you will be outside. We are now going to break for coffee. We will be back here in this room at 11 o'clock. Interesting, that last question on ethics, I'm sure will play a big part in the first session when we come back from coffee, because that session will all be about deploying AI in government. So I think that will definitely come up. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you back here at 12:30. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.